murdered en masse, he wrote, if I could save all the children of Germany by bringing them to England, and only half by bringing them to Israel, I would choose the second. In other words, Jews should die. That's not because we just have to further our ideology of Zionism. Basically, maybe I should just quote Chaim Weizmann just to round it all off, because he's the first president. They have a prime minister and a president. So you should just get a full view of what we're talking about. Now, Chaim Weizmann really, time is precious, but Chaim Weizmann was the one who was maybe the one who was pivotal, not maybe, he was the one who was pivotal in the ratification of the of the Balfour Declaration and the white papers and so forth, that there should be an acceptance that the Jewish people should have their homeland and so forth. He was very close with the leaders in Europe, and he eventually became the first president of the state of Israel. And in 1938, and I'm quoting not only from his writings, just to show, it was quoted in the Jewish press, October 2002, which is a Zionist, an extremely Zionist paper, and they're quoting him. We have in our historic documents, we have all of this also quoted from them themselves. And I'm quoting, Palestine cannot absorb the Jews of Europe. Again, remember, this is 1930, at the beginning when Jews were starting to be slaughtered, and they were looking for a solution to save the Jews. So, and he had this meeting of the Zionist leaders. Palestine cannot absorb the Jews of Europe. We want only the best of Jewish youth to come to us. We want only the educated, meaning secularly educated, to enter Palestine for the purpose of increasing its culture. The other Jews will have to stay where they are and face whatever fate awaits them. These millions of Jews are dust on the wheels of history and may have to be blown away. We don't want them pouring into Palestine. We don't want Tel Aviv to become another low-grade ghetto, like a shtetl, Jews like me. They don't want that. There's no words for all of this. And these are supposedly the saviors, the ones who have the respect of the world, and the ones who are looked as the civilized society and so forth. Now, when a person wants to invest $100 in some business, and it looks he may go ahead and do it. But you'll ask if he's going to invest $1 million, then we've had, unfortunately, a very bad example with the Ponzi scheme, that people will see that it's just a lesson that you have to be much, much more careful. And people insist they're very careful, and in fact, they're bringing to account the ones who are supposed to be accountable for all this. How could you invest so much and you didn't do your homework? We have people who are coming and speaking as representatives of a whole people of a religion, and taking over a land and so forth. Don't you have to do your homework about them? I think that it would be an obligation to do proper homework about this. And if somebody comes along and says we've caught him, he's a thief, then you would, before you're going to put in that $1 million, and if the person screams he's a thief, then you're going, and he says, I have proof and so forth, you're not going to say, okay, well, the meeting is now, and I have to put in the money. You're going to do your homework. Now again, Zionism, as we say, is a transformation to nationalism. That concept, of course, is antithetical, is the opposite of the spirituality. But there's now when it comes into reality, when it comes into being, to make it on the ground, when you're making this nationalism, it says in our teaching, the Jewish teachings, that Ein ben Dovid bar, the Messiah won't come till it ends even the smallest sovereignty, an inch of sovereignty by Jews, because we are under we are in exile. What does that mean, we are in exile? The Jewish people have made this covenant on Mount Sinai, and this covenant required of us, as a Jewish people, to be holy. And because of that, God said, the nations prior to you served idol worshipry. They were offered to, even when the Jewish people went in, they were offered, if they would stop serving idol worshipry, they can stay. If not, it says, then they have to be banished, because it's a holy land, because the land itself will reject them. And God warns the Jewish people, it says many times in the Torah, and it says, be careful, do not defile the land, because you will also be rejected, as the nations prior to you have been rejected from the land. The land itself rejects the people because of its holiness. So be careful, do not defile the land. And then we have the books of the prophets. Everybody could look, Isaiah, Ezekiel, Jeremiah. The Jews were constantly warned by God that we have to better ourselves, be on this high level of spirituality. If not, it was imminent that we were going to be sent from the land. Eventually, it came, the destruction 2,000 years ago of the temple. When that happened, we were sent out of the land. We accept this as a bitter medicine from God because we were not on that high level of holiness that we had to be, and we accepted the concept of exile. What is this concept of exile? Because we were physically weak? No. Because we were lacking spiritually, and God brought about this thing. Of course, the people who killed the Jewish people, the people who did the atrocities or whatever, killed people, they have, in Judaism it works, the studying is like this. If somebody, God forbid, murders somebody, does anything to hurts, harms somebody, then it's because God allowed it. Everything, good and bad, is only from God. The person who's a thief, he takes a spoon from a restaurant, sticks it in his pocket and walks away. He says, well, you know, everything is from God. No, he has to pay. He's a thief. But it was from God's will that the restaurant lost that spoon. In other words, God is perfect, and everything is imperfect, and it's when it happens, the thief will be punished by God, and the one who lost it and his heart is broken or whatever, it's because he did something that God wanted to punish him. So the people when the Jewish people were sent into exile and they brought the destruction of the temple, they were punished. But it's not because of our physical lacking that we were sent in, because we were weaker than the Greeks or the Romans. It's because God made that decree that we should be banished. And this is the simple Judaism 101. This is accepted by the Jews. 2,000 years. We've gone through in these 2,000 years trials and tribulations, the Crusades, the famous ones that people know, the Spanish Inquisition. Of course, we've had World War II, the Holocaust, but there's many times before that. And the Jewish people, in the middle, there was a golden age. There was times the Jewish people were very rich, and they asked the rabbis through this time of exile, maybe we should just buy a piece of land. There was response. They were always told, have patience. Maimonides wrote a book called The Letter to Yemen. It was asked, and every time they said, patience. God is totally compassionate, and therefore don't think that the solution is to try to leave what the minute that God feels the time is proper, with a blink of an eye, there will be a metaphysical change. God will end exile. So, and it's because it's God's punishment, it's a medicine. And when God feels the time has come, the medicine has worked, then He will end exile. When we have repented properly and so forth, there will be an end of exile. What is it? So the Jewish people speak, we say in our prayers, because of our sins, we were sent into exile. And the solution is when God accepts our repentance. What will be then? We believe that the end of exile, there will be a metaphysical change in the world. All humanity together will recognize that there's one God. I carry a picture. Well, there was a picture somewhere here that's the Rabbi, whoever anybody came to the United Nations by it's called the Isaiah Wall. There it is. The Isaiah Wall, it's a concave wall where many demonstrations take place. It's a wall like that across the United Nations. Even though the United Nations is based on democracy and so forth, but they have the verse of Isaiah that says, they shall beat their swords into plowshares, the spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against another nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. It says the wolf and the sheep will rest together. That concept is an impossibility in our understanding, that the wolf and the sheep can rest together. There shall be but this is a metaphysical change. So the Jewish yearning and hoping, what our whole lives are based, is simply this: that we should better ourselves. That we have to. This is our life's work, to elevate ourselves spiritually close to God, and ultimately the pinnacle of our work is the glorification of God. When will the pinnacle of this be? When all humanity will recognize the one God. So we say, we have many verses in our prayers, and everything is based on this. It says, we say the prophet says, the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord, as waters cover the sea. or King David wrote, and this is our prayers, when the nations, the people are gathered together, and the kingdom, to serve God. This is what we yearn and hope for, not for statehood, not for nationalism, nothing in that at all. We are hoping for the glorification of God. And how does it, in other words, there'll be atheists who you know as hardened atheists, and you'll go out in the morning, and all of a sudden, everybody's going to have the spirit of wanting to serve God, and I won't have to convince you, you won't have to convince me. We're not going to say, oh, this is not the Messiah, this is the Messiah. It will be a spirit of everybody joining hands to go up and serve God. That is the Jewish yearning. Anything prior to this happening, this metaphysical change, we were warned by God while we were in exile that as soon as the destruction of the temple came about, we were warned. There's a prophecy of King Solomon that has to do with the existing in exile. God said to us, I'm putting you under 3 oaths. Do not return. I sent you out because of your spiritual lacking. Do not return en masse to the land in great numbers. Do not rebel against any nation. You have to be loyal citizens in every country where you are dispersed out. And do not try to make attempts to end exile. Not that you could be successful. You can't shoot the spirituality. But don't even make attempts. Now, the Zionists, getting back to these people were people who, again, didn't recognize God, took God out of their lives, and therefore their whole concept was nationalism. They wanted to be respected amongst the nations. So they decided they're going to make a nation. So first of all, we were warned that will be an impediment to, it says that God, the Messiah won't come as long as there's even one concept of Jewish sovereignty, because that flies in the face of what God wants of us, repentance, humbleness, of breaking our haughtiness that brought about the destruction of the temple. But then we were put under specific oaths, saying that we are forbidden, because God saw, of course, with His great wisdom, that the people will be impatient and they'll say, look, we can't suffer like this. We have to go and make our own, save ourselves, because they won't accept that there's a ruler of the world, that everything that happens is because nothing can happen without God. So in other words, if somebody does something bad, you can't. It's not because he did something bad. It's like with a dog, bites the stick. He hit the dog. He bites the stick. What's ridiculous? Don't bite the stick. There's something behind the stick. There's something that's hitting, that's wielding that stick. This is what the concept is. Don't be short-sighted. You can't fight that stick. You have to understand what is coming. Where is it coming from? It's coming from God. But God saw that people will be short-sighted and so forth. So He said, I'm warning you, don't return en masse. Don't try to end exile. Don't rebel against nations. Zionism, being that they took God out of the equation, they said, we're going to make our nationalism. And of course, the first thing being that logically they didn't want godliness, so they wanted to make their nationalism in Uganda, in Argentina, places that are very lush lands, that there should be a productive land. But they realized, of course, that they will not be able to get the support, world support, which you need a fantastic amount of money to create a state and so forth. They won't get the backing of the people. They'll have some of admirers and supporters, but not what they need. They won't get the support of non-Jews. There's many non-Jews, Christians around the world, people who read the Bible, and they also believe Jews have the Holy Land. So what they decided is, you know what, we'll go to Palestine. Okay, it'll cost more money to invest, to build up the land, but that's the solution. Then we'll be able to get the backing of the Jewish people, because every Jew knows that his grandparents and so forth, whether he's ignorant, lacking of knowledge of the Torah, but he knows this is what Jews always aspire in our prayers. Everybody says it, that we want to return, we want to return. Most people, unfortunately, in the world, unfortunately, are non-religious Jews, not knowledgeable in the teachings of the Torah, but they know that they gather together once a year, the Passover Seder it's called, where they eat the meal, and at the end of the meal they say, L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim, the coming year in Jerusalem. And they understand this is what it's about. But of course, they could just buy a ticket and go to Jerusalem. But that's not what it's about. L'shana means when God will reveal His glory. But the Zionists, this is an opportunity. So they came along and said, we'll go to Palestine. Now this is going against every single oath of God. They're going back en masse. In order to do, they couldn't just say we're going to Palestine. They had to say the beginning of redemption. And if you hear their advertisements, always they say they make a beautiful, soft music, that touches the heart, and then they say, we've been 2,000 years without a home and so forth, and they go talking about the biblical things, and then they say, oh, and now we're returning, we have the state, we have, support us, and so forth. So what they're playing on the emotions of the Jewish people, and they call themselves the beginning of redemption. And that's exactly what it says, do not attempt to leave exile in any manner. So that's the third. They're breaching all three oaths, and an oath by us is much more than even a commandment. It's considered the most serious thing that a person has. So they're breaching every single concept of Judaism. The oath, all oaths, returning en masse. But there's one other thing. Going there to Palestine, if it would be uninhabited, we'd be forbidden to have our own entity. That's the concepts of exile. But this would be totally forbidden. But being that they have to go to Palestine, and Palestine was inhabited, so now it compounds it thousandfold. Because now they're rebelling against the nation. They're going against everything in the Torah that says, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not, all the concepts, the compassion, everything gets thrown out the window. So in every facet of the Torah is breached. So understandably, that all the rabbinical authorities would oppose such a thing. Weeks prior to coming here and translating, putting together the giants of the Torah, the ones that anybody and the whole world would say wouldn't dare. A rabbi certainly wouldn't dare and say, "Oh, I refute these people." The Chafetz Chaim, whose name is the one who wanted life. That was the name of his books. Rabbi Yisroel Meir Cohen, the Chazon Ish who lived in Bnei Brak in Palestine. The giants of the world, who everybody recognizes giants universally, every single one of them, with the most vehement, vociferous opposition to Zionism, they stood up. Everybody said, in every facet, in every aspect, they spoke in every concept of Zionism is totally forbidden and contradictory to what our Torah, to Judaism, and we have to stand far from it. We shouldn't support it, and so forth. This is, and it's unbelievable what they write. Things that if I would say, people would say that I don't think they would call me very derogatory names. But you have to look at this. And this is a fact. Nobody can refute it. So if someone comes along, somebody with the title of rabbi or deputy board of rabbis or whatever, and I don't know if they keep the Ten Commandments. Some of them do, some of them don't. I don't know. So, but they call themselves representation of God, rabbis. Let's just say they do, but then they're unfortunately misguided. They're making a tremendous mistake, because just like if they would say, okay, I have the title of rabbi or deputy board of rabbis, and you don't have to keep the Sabbath. How do they may have a position, but how does the position is rabbis connotates that they're representing Judaism. That's what it means. So how could they say don't keep the Sabbath? How could they say that they're standing up against every concept of Judaism, and they're saying Theodor Herzl is right, who announced that he didn't circumcise his child, and they should go against every concept of Judaism, where all the rabbis stood in opposition and so forth. And the time does not permit now, but if you would just see, they made a law system, not the Torah. Their law system in Israel is a secular law system. They did make a rabbinate that they pay for good money, and they have people who are knowledgeable people. I'm not taking away their knowledge, but they pay their lackeys, so when they have to cut down the olive orchards, they should get some slip from the rabbi, a compensation that they should be able to do it, or things like that. Why don't they have, it's according to the Jewish law, it's blasphemy if Jewish people who have any type of quarrel or whatever, that they don't use the Jewish law to settle the dispute. That's called blasphemy. It's because in other words, you're saying God isn't smart enough and so forth. So basically, the rabbinical authorities universally oppose Zionism. It's all there. I'm just going to understand, again, this is, do your homework, look at that. But just in Palestine alone, when the Zionists came, first of all, we have writings to show that 95% of the Jewish population were opposed, written in Haaretz magazine, that they wrote that they were being terrorized by the Zionists. The Jewish population, they were 95% Orthodox, they were opposed to it, and they were basically ignored. But I'll get right prior to this was in the 1910s, 1920s, and so forth, because the population was Jewish, religious. So what did that mean? What did that mean? That they served God, and they didn't want the Zionists, they didn't want Theodor Herzl. Thank you. Theodor Herzl, they could go to Rome if they wanted Catholicism, if they're looking for something else. And if they didn't want religion, they could have gone to other cities that sell, immorality. Basically, but when the Zionists, they were successful through Chaim Weitzman and all these other leaders, that they had the ear and the, for whatever reason, that there's many reasons that they were successful in convincing Britain and all these lands to gratify, to give them a piece of land, for reasons, whether Britain wanted the United States to get involved in World War I because they were desperate, and they promised them land, as that was the story with Chaim Weizmann, how he got the permission to make the state. But anyway, if you will look in the head, we made a rabbinate in the beginning of the 20th century because the Jewish community felt threatened by this influx of this new type of Jew, this non-religious Jew, because nobody came up to Palestine to become rich. It was a poor, poor land. But throughout the ages, it was a holy land. We are in the diaspora. But people would come up in their old age, rabbis, holy men, who would go up to live off their life in holiness in the Holy Land. They would bring their disciples, they would bring their students. And that's how it became a community, one of the richest spiritual community in the world of Jewish people, full of holy men, rabbis, scholars. And this is how they lived a very poor existence, materialistically. Now, when they came up there, all of a sudden, a new type of Jews coming, somebody who threw away his religion for what? To till the land, to build a statehood. So when they saw this, they immediately made a rabbinate. It was called the Eidah Chareidis, the God-fearing Jewish community. And Rabbi Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld was picked to be the leader. When he passed on, they looked for the greatest holy man, scholar amongst the greatest that they could find, to lead the most respected community in the world of Judaism, that the whole world looked at as a beacon of light. So they picked Rabbi Dushinsky from Europe, and he became the chief rabbi. He went up special to become chief rabbi in Jerusalem. And I'm not going to read his whole his letter, but he wrote in 1947. His student, by the way, was Rabbi Leitner, blessed memory, was my teacher, passed away a year ago. And he told us personally, we have to have it taped. He said he was there. His rabbi there came a delegation from the United Nations. So forth. They came and they asked. They had to check before they ratify something. They asked the communities, the Muslim, the Christian communities, if they want a state and so forth. Now, when they asked them this question, I don't know what they answered, but I gather they weren't very excited about making a Jewish state. But when I can tell you what happened when they approached the leader of Judaism in Palestine, the head of Jerusalem, and he wrote a whole letter, and then he ended, "We furthermore wish to express our definite opposition to a Jewish state in any part of Palestine." And this was a declaration on July 16, 1947. Shortly afterwards, when he saw that he's ignored, it's going to be imminent, they're going to ratify a so-called Jewish state. So 3 months later, on November 18, 1947, he sent another letter to the Secretary General of the United Nations, like success, and he wrote, "The Jewish Orthodox community, Eidah Chareidis, means God-fearing community of Jerusalem, comprising 60,000 souls, objects to the plea of including Jerusalem in the Jewish state, or its residents becoming automatically citizens of the Jewish state. Our community demands that Jerusalem be an international zone under your protection with full autonomy, and its residents be free citizens of the international zone of Jerusalem. We beg of you not to take any action before receiving our memorandum, Chief Rabbi Dushinsky." What I want to point out in the name of the Ashkenazi community, I want to point out that this is, of course, this is in our historic documents. There's much, much more. He asked for Jerusalem not because he wanted Jerusalem to be the only one, not the part. It's because he didn't want entirely this concept of a Jewish state. Why? Remember, this is 1930, at the beginning when Jews were starting to be slaughtered, and they were looking for a solution to save the Jews. So, and he had this meeting of the Zionist leaders. Palestine cannot absorb the Jews of Europe. We want only the best of Jewish youth to come to us. We want only the educated, meaning secularly educated, to enter Palestine for the purpose of increasing its culture. The other Jews will have to stay where they are and face whatever fate awaits them. These millions of Jews are dust on the wheels of history and may have to be blown away. We don't want them pouring into Palestine. We don't want Tel Aviv to become another low-grade ghetto, like a shtetl, Jews like me. They don't want that. Accountable for all this. How could you invest so much and you didn't do your homework? We have people who are coming and speaking as representatives of a whole people of a religion, and taking over a land and so forth. Don't you have to do your homework about them? I think that it would be an obligation to do proper homework about this. And if somebody comes along and says, we've caught him, he's a thief, then you would, before you're going to put in that $1 million, and if the person screams he's a thief, then you're going, and he says, I have proof and so forth. You're not going to say, okay, well, the meeting is now. There's no words for all of this. And these are supposedly the saviors, the ones who have the respect of the world, and the ones who are cooked as the civilized society and so forth. Now, when a person wants to invest $100 in some business, and it looks he may go ahead and do it. But you'll ask if he's going to invest $1 million, then we've had, unfortunately, a very bad example with the Ponzi scheme, that people see that it's just a lesson that you have to be much, much more careful. And people insist they're very careful, and in fact, they're bringing to account the ones who are supposed to be murdered en masse. He wrote, if I could save all the children of Germany by bringing them to England, and only half by bringing them to Israel, I would choose the second. In other words, Jews should die. That's not because we just have to further our ideology of Zionism. Basically, maybe I should just quote Chaim Weizmann just to round it all off, because he's the first president. They have a prime minister and a president. So you should just get a full view of what we're talking about. Now, Chaim Weizmann really, time is precious, but Chaim Weizmann was the one who was maybe the one who was pivotal, not maybe, he was the one who was pivotal in the ratification of the state of the Balfour Declaration and the white papers and so forth, that there should be an acceptance that the Jewish people should have their homeland and so forth. He was very close with the leaders in Europe, and he eventually became the first president of the state of Israel. And in 1938, and I'm quoting not only from his writings, just to show, it was quoted in the Jewish press, October 2002, which is a Zionist, an extremely Zionist paper, and they're quoting him. We have in our historic documents, we have all of this also quoted from them themselves. And I'm quoting, Palestine cannot absorb the Jews of Europe. Again,